The Zombies. I suffered most grievously when I first fought them. They were slow enough in reacting that I saw an opening to cut the first one almost in half with my sword. I was expecting him to drop to the ground, and that's how he got his own sword into my shoulder. I fought on, but by the time we beat them, those of us who lived were all bleeding, most of us from several wounds. It wasn't enough to outfight them. We had to try to outlast them too. From Stemar Holst, an Imperial soldier. Zombies are shambling horrors that are used extensively by the vampire counts and other undead powers as simple cannon fodder, staggering towards the enemy battle line in a slow yet noisome horde. Grotesquely reanimated corpses, zombies are compelled by the dark magic of a vampire or necromancer and driven by the will of their master to commit acts of extreme violence. They are truly foul things to behold, living corpses that are wroth with decay and unclean flesh. A zombie's skin hangs in strips from his tattered frame, revealing withered muscle and bloodless veins. With the use of dark magic, these zombies stagger towards the enemies with grasping arms and teeth. Yet zombies are often made from more than corpses, for when the vampire counts are on the warpath, their necromancers are often forced to improvise in order to amass a truly unstoppable horde. Spiked and rusting railings from graveyard fences are substituted for missing limbs. Broken backs are butt-dressed by mouldering planks or hammered into a semblance of solidity with rusted coffin nails. Fingers hacked off by wild sword thrusts are replaced with jagged spikes and elven arrowheads. Any debilitating wound they suffer is compensated for with stomach-churning expediency, for all that a zombie's master requires of it is to stumble into battle. For all their horrific appearance, zombies are slow and clumsy, making it easy for local militia and adventuring warbands to destroy individuals or even to bring down small groups without any casualties. Unfortunately, the old world boasts a rich supply of corpses, and thus zombies can be raised and set loose upon the living in overwhelming numbers. These sickening undead have no skill to speak of, but are instead driven only by the insatiable urge to rend, kill, and consume the living. Any warrior unfortunate enough to be pulled down by a zombie horde will find himself torn slowly apart by a mass of desperate clawing fingers, his flesh gouged from his body in grisly, glistening chunks. The fortunate die quickly, but those unlucky souls who are trampled beneath the horde spend their death throes in miserable agony as their innards become a crimson feast. Soldiers who have met in battle with the undead before, or who hear the terrifying tales whispered at campfires, know the best methods with which to slay the restless dead. A blow to the skull with a hammer or axe will slay a zombie outright, and severing the head is an even surer method of destruction. But precise strikes such as these take focus and skill, and zombies are seldom found in ones or twos. Instead, those death walkers are raised in large numbers, gathering upon the battlefield in their hundreds. Against hordes such as these, even the strongest sword arms tire, the stoutest hards can falter, and the most skilled blades can become lodged in putrid flesh. Even those of surpassing skill will eventually feel the clammy touch of dead hands upon their skin. Zombies are easily sustained by the powers of necromancy, jerking back to their feet like jangling puppets as invisible force swirls around them. Their numbers can seem almost infinite as they press relentlessly forwards. Those that fall in battle compelled by necromantic power to stagger or crawl towards the foe moments after being cut down. Such shuffling hordes are often used by vampires to exhaust the regiments of their enemies, slowly overwhelming the foe in a ceaseless tide of blood-slicked, maggot-ridden flesh. The Skeleton Warriors. However you look at it, the skeleton is a perfect symbol of both death and undeath, that part which endures after the rotting of the body and the departure of the soul. Fitting then that these are among our most feared and numerous soldiers. What human could hope to resist death? From Constantine von Carstein, a vampire lord. Skeleton warriors are, as their name implies, skeletons that have been raised from their graves to fight, willingly or not, on the behalf of the necromancer who raised them, forming the overall backbone of most undead armies under the control of the vampire counts. For thousands of years, armies have marched and fought across the old world since the time of its creation. There is barely a field, hill, or valley that has not seen fierce fighting at some point in the past. Going as far back as the reign of Sigmar Heldenhammer, and even earlier, these great battles have left many unmarked and unblessed graves scattered all across the world. Such charnel fields often attract large influxes of dark magic, forcing the souls of some warriors to remain trapped within the material realm. Some are the spirits of men betrayed by their commanders, others of cowards who were cut down as they ran, or of those who died a violent and unexpected death. Unable to find peace due to their actions, these spirits are forever bound to the dead corpse that lay within the earth. Beneath the mud lie the grave-stained bones of these bitter, ancient warriors. Long held beneath the earth, they are clad in their corroded armor, their lifeless hands still gripping the swords, axes, spears, and shields they held during the time of their death. Provided their remains have not been blessed by the rites of Moor, a spirit is therefore vulnerable to the sorcerous abilities of a necromancer or vampire, where they use the coiling energies of dark magic to instill a semblance of life and a flicker of spirit into these dormant warriors. As the regiments of past massacres claw their way to the surface, their empty eye sockets have been known to glow an eerie light, a small flicker of semblance of their former personality. Silently, these corpses would gather together in a semblance of their old ranks, mutely awaiting the commands of their new lord as the remains of their tattered banners flap in the unnatural breeze of their creation. Though a skeleton no longer possesses flesh to cut nor organs to pierce, a well-aimed blow can still destroy it and release the spirit that is trapped within. Dark magic is used to replace flesh that has long since been dissolved from the bones, but an arrow or sword thrust can disrupt the magic that binds the ancient bones of these soldiers together. Decapitation or severing of the spine is usually the most effective means to release the skeleton warrior's spirit from the mortal plane, and a heavy blow from a bludgeoning weapon such as a hammer or club can easily shatter an entire skeleton into pieces. However, even those that are felled can be raised up again as necromantic power knits together shattered bones and instills them with vigor once more. All that these long-dead fighters can recall in their mortal life are faint impressions from battles fought in ages past. All that they feel is the compulsion to fight and obey their masters. They have no autonomy or intelligence, though some vestige of their battlefield training remains ingrained in their bones. Driven by the undying will of a vampire, these ragged warriors can still wield their swords and spears, and raise a shield to block an enemy attack. A mortal who dares to fight an army of skeletons is confronted by rank upon rank of ghastly apparitions. Imbued without the need to eat, sleep, or feel the touch of fear, these skeletons are a horrible sight to all those of the living. The Sylvanian peasant levies. What man would willingly march to war under the banners of the undead? And why do the counts tolerate these warm-blooded folk and induct them into their otherwise rotting and fleshless ranks? It is hard to understand either of these questions, and I will never be able to fully come to terms with the answers. From Grand Marshal Blucher von Vinke. Although the armies of the vampire counts consist predominantly of undead raised through necromancy, in some cases units of Sylvanian peasant levies have followed their von Carstein masters into battle. The peasants of Sylvania live grim and joyless lives, in constant fear of their vampiric overlords. Thus, just as the human rulers of other nations press their peasants into service, so do the vampire counts of Sylvania. In battle, they are not a very effective fighting force, but are used in a similar manner as zombies or skeletal infantry. However, they are capable of independent thought, which can give them an advantage over their lifeless comrades in arms. In particular, they fight with the grim desperation of a man more afraid of his commander than his foes. And of course, when the levies die in battle, they can simply be reanimated. Sylvanian peasant levies are sometimes armed by the vampire counts, but usually carry their own weapons. Thus they are typically found carrying spears, staves, pikes, axes, hammers, skiffs, farm implements, hunting bows, and occasionally crossbows or hand guns. The Crypt ghouls. Not as scary as they look, but you have to be careful of those poison claws. I could never work out whether they were really undead or not either. Not that it's too important, you can kill them easily enough with cold steel. No need for magic weapons and spells. From Captain Schultz, a mercenary commander. Crypt ghouls, also known simply as ghouls, are the degenerated descendants of humans who were reduced to cannibalistic creatures due to the consumption of raw or decaying flesh. Crypt ghouls are ugly, stooping creatures with only a vestigial sense of their former life or personality. Their skin is sallow and filthy, their eyes are bestial and insane, and their snarling lips reveal sharp-pointed teeth in slavering mouths. Dressed only in the rags they pull from their victims, crypt ghouls carry weapons they have picked up or have crudely fashioned from the remains of their unwholesome meals. Usually, these skulking fiends do not need such implements to kill, for they have long claws and powerful teeth sufficient enough for their needs. These claws are encrusted with grey filth and decaying meat. Those that take even the slightest scratch from their talons can die from unnaturally potent infections that spread through the victim's body. In addition, their constant diet of rot-fouled meat confers a sinewy and unwholesome resilience from most diseases. Though not truly undead, crypt ghouls unconsciously feel the dark magic that surrounds the most powerful undead lords and are drawn inexorably towards it. Once their presence is betrayed, their newfound master quickly dominates their weak and willing minds. Though they will lope into battle at the behest of their master, crypt ghouls and even their ghastly pack leaders are cowardly creatures that will slink away from combat if their prey seems to be fighting back with any real determination. This innate cowardice can be overcome by a mental command from their vampiric masters, for those ghouls who have fled can be coerced back to the front lines with the lure of dark magic. The first ghouls were the descendants of the insane and evil-hearted cannibals living within the jungles of the Southlands, men who ate the flesh of their dead in gory rituals. These primitive corpse-eaters lived upon the shores of the Sour Sea, drawn to dwell under the looming, freezing shadow of Nagashizar. The tribes worshipped the great necromancer and frequently partook of the dark feast. They would gorge themselves on the flesh of their own, and generation by generation they were driven mad by their own loathsome practices. Now these devolved humanoids roam an area of landscape known simply as the Desolation of Nagash, preying on travelers in their search for fresh meat. Even in the enlightened era of Emperor Karl Franz, there are tales of cannibalism within the borders of the empire. During times of harsh pestilence and famine, the desperate and the depraved take to eating human flesh to stay alive. The stories tell that isolated farms and sometimes even whole villages have devolved into this vile state after consuming both raw and decaying flesh after a particularly long enough time. Some even claim the practice has become customary rather than necessary. During the ghoul swarms of 2512, when the crops failed for the third year running, the knightly orders of Stirland were employed en masse to scour the borders of their barren realm. The full-scale battle between the brightly clad soldiery of the Elector Count and the ravenous, blotch-skinned hordes of the afflicted villages has not been easily forgotten. Their fields and shabby hamlets were burned to the ground, but the memory of their foulness lingers on. The priests of Moor do what they can to protect their holy gardens against the encroachments of crypt ghouls, but many of the old world's graveyards and cemeteries date back 1,000 years or more, and beneath them are labyrinths of subterranean chambers and tunnels. On occasion, the Brotherhood of Moor will employ a professional witch hunter to sweep the catacombs with sword and fire to reduce their numbers. In battle, ghouls often attack their enemies in large packs, where they use their speed and numbers to either ambush or encircle their enemies. Lacking any proper armor, weapons, or even discipline, these ghouls would act much in the same way as wild wolves, where they would often pick the weakest amongst their numbers and slowly drag the enemy down one by one. These ghouls are especially effective against enemies that are either scattered or in a rout, for without their military formation, each enemy soldier becomes easy prey for any singular ghoul to tackle alone. The Crypt Horrors. These creatures always amuse me. Oh, certainly they can be useful, having minions who can go out in the daylight, however much they might not want to, is not to be underrated, yet the irony is not lost on me, that I have some humans who are so desperate for the scraps from my table that they will even fight the rest of you for the chance to bite on a few corpses. From Constantine von Karstein, a vampire lord. Crypt horrors are a variation of common ghouls who have consumed the blood of a vampire, giving them supernatural size and strength. They are used by many undead factions as a form of elite heavy shock infantry. The malformed monstrosities known as crypt horrors are thankfully a rare sight, spoken of in hushed whispers by night watchmen, old priests of Moor, grave keepers, and other nocturnal citizens of the Empire. The few persistent reports of these looming and moon-mad fiends are dismissed as the ravings of superstitious fools. At best, they are thought to be exaggerated sightings of unnaturally large crypt ghouls. Unfortunately for the lands of the old world, however, the stories are often accurate, for crypt horrors are very real. In order to create a crypt horror, a vampire must open his veins to a ghoul and allow it to gulp down his precious blood, which is essentially a pale bastardization of the blood kiss, and an act that is reviled by those who count themselves amongst the elite of Sylvanian society. As such, these acts are often perpetrated by only the most desperate of vampires, most specifically the vampires of the Strigoi bloodline. For a Strigoi to allow a crypt ghoul's foetid mouth to sink into its flesh is a sign that the vampire is truly desperate. Nonetheless, some ghoul kings encourage this strange and abhorrent practice. Once a crypt ghoul has drunk the blood of a vampire, its eyes turn red and it goes into a killing frenzy. During this stage in its transformation, the crypt horror would pull down weaker members of its own pack, dragging its screeching prey into an open grave or a shattered tomb in order to consume its gruesome feast undisturbed. After finishing its cannibalistic orgy, the swollen ghoul will crawl back to its awaiting master, hoping for another draught of its vampiric blood. This transformation continues until, by the coming of the next full moon, the new crypt horror will have grown to several times its original size and ferocity, thanks to the unnatural blood of the vampire and the consumption of extraordinary amounts of flesh. Crypt horrors provide a tangible benefit to their Strigoi masters. True undead can be warded away from grave haunts by sacred sigils and priests of Moor. Typical crypt ghouls are too cowardly to mount a full-scale assault on such a place. Hence, Strigoi ghoul kings will create crypt horrors whenever they need to smash through such formidable defenses. Crypt horrors are neither living nor truly dead, and as the call of Moor's realm pulls at what remains of their souls, they vent their rage upon the crypt gardens of the god of death. Because of this, the human grave keepers of sepulchres and mausoleums fear crypt horrors above all other minions of the ghoul kings. Once the magical wards guarding the cemeteries are destroyed by the rampage of these foul beasts, their vampiric master is free to raid the corpse fields beyond. Though the lineage of Strigos has broken every taboo by creating them, they are able to gain power in this way. A crypt horror typically towers over its smaller ghoul brethren, and though it retains the characteristic stoop and loping gait of its former life, its sinews become hard as iron, bony growths and protrusions push out from the creature's spine, and talons lengthen from splayed, dexterous hands. The potent diet of tough ghoul flesh washed down with vampiric blood wreaks changes inside as well as outside. Though the crypt horror's freakish metabolism will soon drive it to consume itself, in the meantime the fiend's constitution is such that it can reknit even the most horrific wound with an effort of will. This is the main reason why the more elitist vampire cliques tolerate these foul monsters. Dark magic, the sustaining power of necromancy, literally runs in a crypt ghoul's veins, and therefore the sheer violence it can unleash is not to be underestimated. In battle, packs of crypt horrors muscle their way towards the front lines, eyes glowing with dire light. They use shattered gravestones, tomb statues, and cemetery railings to smash aside those brave enough to stand before them. But it is their meat-encrusted fangs and talons that are to be avoided at all costs. Even a shallow wound from a crypt horror bears enough poisonous rot to kill a horse. Despised by the living and the dead alike, crypt horrors are creatures to be truly feared. The Grave Guard. Wights are driven by a malign intelligence all their own, not the unquestioning allegiance of their lesser counterpart. Just as a powerful necromancer will someday die and rise again as an undead, all his vile powers intact, so too can the greatest of the warrior heroes. Many of them are truly ancient, the remnants of an aboriginal, tribal people who once occupied the lands of the Empire thousands of years before it was so known. From Valdemar, a scholar of Nuln. The Grave Guard are the undead corpses of long-past heroes and warlords that have been arisen from their grave with a partial flicker of the original soul trapped within. The process of creating a wight allows them to fight the enemies of the necromancer that raised them with the skills and tools of their former life. On other occasions, wights are often arisen by their own means when the place of their rest, such as a tomb or mound, was desecrated by outside intruders, forcing the deceased spirit to be sucked into his former body by the dark magic that permeates from such an evil place. Although their bodies have decayed, leaving only bones and tattered flesh, a grave guard is held together by evil magic so strong that it has endured for centuries. They wear ancient battle gear of primitive alloy, corroded by time and dusty with the years. These eerie, silent sentinels stand constant vigil on the crumbling battlements of many Sylvanian castles, never resting and eternally ready to defend their vampire masters. When a vampire marches forth, his grave guard advance at the head of the undead host. They form a formidable corps of warriors, using the skills and tools of their former life to their own advantage. In battle, the sheer resilience of the grave guard has become well known across the nations of humans, elves, and dwarfs. Their combination of stout shields, thick armor plates, and the natural resilience of the undead means that a simple sword blow has little chance of stopping them. Only with the most powerful blows from a weapon or the magical properties of spells and items could hope to pierce the dark magic that protects a grave guard in combat. In battle, the grave guard form the elite and disciplined core of an undead army, where they are considerably more durable than the typical skeleton warriors, yet far more disciplined than even the most docile Vargheist. As such, it is common to see the grave guards at close proximity to the vampire or necromancer that raised them. Standing sentinel throughout Sylvania are watchtowers. At the top stand the vigilant grave guard, with yearning mouths always open and piercing red eyes that never close. The tower's inhabitants do not take such action just against the small folk, but any intruders and invaders that dare approach. The Cairn race. They appear to cling to their undead status by sheer willpower. Their magic is irrelevant. Whatever petty dabblings they may have indulged in during their lives have clearly failed, or else they would still have a corporeal form. It is only their twisted spirits racked with hatred and pain that keeps them in this world at all, and only by the most tenuous threads. From Heinrich Maltz, a high priest of Verena. Cairn wraiths are hooded, spectral spirits of former necromancers or sorcerers that have used the corrupting influence of dark magic to extend their lives beyond the mortal limit, but at the price of losing one's own mortal body. Though their appearance may perceive it, these spirits are not servants of Mor, the death god, in any way, for they have defied the death god's authority by preventing the inevitability of their deaths and continuing to do so even in the afterlife. Afraid of the punishment that lies for them in the afterlife, these spirits would try all they can to cling to this fading world. Within the material world, these spirits are amongst the most dreaded of all undead. Lacking physical forms altogether, they cannot be put down by axe, sword, or hammer. Even the strongest faiths, such as exorcisms used by warrior priests, cannot banish such creatures easily. Worse still, the icy touch of a Cairn wraith drains the warm essence of mortal men completely. A Cairn wraith is capable of reaching into the body of an adversary and closing its freezing claws around the victim's vital organs, sending painful chills that kills the man instantly. Before the founding of the colleges of magic, men knew little about the magical arts. For thousands of years there were tribal wise men, gifted seers, healers, astrologers, and hedge magicians who were viewed with suspicion, awe, or fear. Through a quirk of nature or mindset, these lucky few were able to use the winds of magic with relative safety. For most, the only magic that could be harnessed was unpredictable shamanism or difficult rituals. Many did not realize the inherent hazards of what they were doing. Slowly the sorcery corrupted them, and as they became steeped in dark magic, these sorcerers learned to extend the span of their lives by decades, even centuries. Most of these seekers of immortality managed only to preserve their spirits, not their bodies. Decay took their mortal forms, rotting it away even as they sought desperately to sustain it. With no corporeal form to speak of, these sorcerers became wandering spirits, clad only in their death shrouds. As their grip on the world of mortals weakened, these vagrant souls were drawn to places of grief, where they lingered, feeding on the sorrow of mourners. Not truly alive, but unable to die, they became chilling shadows caught between this world and the next. As miserable spirits who hunger for the warmth and flesh of mortals. Bound in the mortal realm to tombs and barrows, swathed in robes of inky darkness, these spirits became Cairn wraiths. So unnatural are Cairn wraiths that their very presence fills the air with horror. Even the hardened soldiery of the Empire shiver at the mention of a Cairn wraith sighting. Most folks that have actually set eyes upon them become crazed with fear long before they are killed. Though each wraith is possessed of a glimmering will, there are ancient rituals known to the eldest vampires that can call forth these unquiet spirits and bind them into an army. Only when the ritual is intoned backwards, syllable by syllable, are the Cairn wraiths released back to the place of their death. The vampire counts purposefully bind these Cairn wraiths, willingly or not, to their service and use them as a form of near-invincible shock infantry. Accompanied by units of deathless warriors, these sinister spirits glide across the battlefield, tattered robes rippling in the etheric winds as arrows, bullets, and bolts pass harmlessly through them. Unhindered by cannonball or flame, the wraiths close in on their prey, seeking out and cutting down the enemy without so much as a whisper. The crippling fear that arises from having to fight a nigh unkillable skith-wielding spectre can make even the bravest men flee the battlefield. Because they are impervious to physical weaponry, only the raw energies of magic or a well-placed blow from an enchanted weapon can slay a Cairn wraith. It is perhaps a blessing, then, that the Cairn wraiths are so few in numbers within the entirety of the old world. Spirit hosts. The spirit hosts are a common sight amongst the armies of the dead, a horde of ethereal ghosts that swarm across the battlefield where neither blade nor bullet can harm them. Across Sylvania, poltergeists and ghosts haunt peasants with dreadful groans and freezing touches, sometimes driving whole villages to be abandoned as a result. When the vampire counts go to war, these restless spirits are pulled along by the dark magic of the undead army. Insubstantial and impervious to mortal weapons, these angry ghosts swarm over the enemy, leeching energy from the living and leaving stark horror in their wake. Sylvania is rich in the spirits of the dead, for it has a long history of misery and suffering, and is rife with polluting warpstone, as well as animating the physical remains of the dead. This sorcerer's energy also has an effect on the souls of the departed. When Vlad von Carstein cast out the priests of Mor, wardens of the dead, he ensured that the spirits of those who had died could not pass into the afterlife. Since then, the unquiet spirits can often be seen as mournful, swirling mists, through which protrude mournful, wailing faces and grasping hands. Their touch draws some of a victim's soul into the underworld, dragging them into a waking nightmare or stealing their knowledge of who they are. Only a priest of Moor can restore the mind of one who has had his spirit drained by a ghost, and survivors of the process are rare. All the peoples of the Empire share a common view of what happens to the souls of the dead. They pass into the underworld, the land of Moor, the god of death. Priests of Moor and wizards of the Amethyst College have been known to contact the soul in the underworld and remind it of its former life, strengthening the soul's grip on its memories. The mortal can then commune with that spirit, and learn of things that have passed and things that are yet to pass. The Empire citizens also believe that sometimes Moor will close the gates of the underworld, and forbid a spirit from entering. He may do this if it is not that individual's time to pass beyond the veil, for instance, or the person has sworn an oath that they have not yet fulfilled. These souls burn brightly in the underworld and disturb the other spirits, and so Moor banishes them back to the realm of the living, condemning them to a shade-like existence until their duty is done. It is these tortured spirits that can be called forth by the necromantic power of a vampire, channeling dark magic so that the roaming ghosts can manifest themselves. Necromancers must undergo a stranger process still to bind the souls of men, sending their own spirits to the underworld of Moor. Once there, they can steal a few souls, snatching them from under the gaze of the god of the dead. However, sometimes Moor catches these interlopers, imprisoning them for eternity. Their body falls into a catatonic state and then slowly rots away, while their soul suffers anguish without end. On the field of battle, these vengeful apparitions cluster together into hosts that drift slowly towards their warm-blooded victims with terrible inevitability. Even a cannonball strike will not damage a spirit host, for they exist only partially in this world. However, their twilight state does anything but render these spirits harmless. The ghost of a cursed man can claw at a mortal's flesh with long taloned hands, stilling the victim's beating heart with a touch and killing him outright, even as his eyes widen in shock. The Vargheists. Vargheists are the darkness within a vampire's soul made manifest. They are towering winged humanoids, each several times the size of a man. Though the Vargheists once walked and talked as lords amongst the chattel, these curse-born vampires have devolved into a ravening predator, desperate for the taste of blood. They prowl the battlefield in packs, ready to pounce upon the least sign of weakness and tear a hole in the enemy ranks with crimson claw and bloody fang. The creation of a Vargheist is a strange metamorphosis that takes place far from the eyes of mortals. Under the extensive castles of the von Carsteins are vast subterranean networks of basements, galleries and dining halls with vaulted ceilings that stretch into the pitch darkness above. This realm of former glories is where the Vargheist's dark birth takes place. Once, these haunted halls were places of grandeur and largesse, the sites of sinister speeches, flesh banquets, and epic displays of privilege. Now they are little more than antique graveyards filled with the detritus of an ancient aristocracy. Moth-eaten drapes and tapestries hang like curtains of moss from the damp-raddled walls. Embroidered rugs and mosaics of bone are hidden by inches of tainted and brackish water that seeps through from the cursed lands above. Broken harpsichords lean drunkenly against the cloth-bound statuary of ancient gods. Shattered coaches and rot-gnawed sedan chairs are heaped amongst haunted portraits and magical relics stolen from conquered civilizations. Within the mounds of priceless bric-a-brac, chain-bound coffins and sculpted sarcophagi nestle like chrysalises in a rotten woodpile. If a chance visitor were to approach these coffins and blow away the carpet of dust upon them, the name von Karstein could just about be made out, chiseled in Baroque letters upon elaborate stone scrollwork. Not all of these coffins are empty, for this hidden realm is where the von Karsteins lock away those of their family who have fallen out of favour. Those who come off worse in the endless power struggles of the vampires often find themselves prematurely buried and left at the mercy of their own relentless thirsts. Slowly, over the course of decades, the constantly dripping water, magically tainted by warpstone in the stalactites overhead, finds its way into the prisons of these unfortunates. Torpid for want of fresh blood, the slumbering vampires begin to devolve and change shape, growing larger and more bestial as the diluted dark magic swilling around them lends them a terrible strength. Whilst the transformation from humanoid into monster takes hold, the muscular Vargheist will crack open its stone prison with a great effort. Casting aside its chains, the creature unfolds its leathery wings and rears up into the darkness, letting loose a terrible scream of rage and betrayal that sends great swarms of bats whirling throughout the cavernous chambers. The shattered remnants of its sarcophages fall away, and the name and personality of its former incumbent is left behind in the mire. The newborn Vargheist begins to hunt, desperate to sink its teeth into mortal veins. At the first taste of blood, the transformation is made permanent. What was once a proud lord of the dead is forever cursed to an existence as a ravening beast. Though each Vargheist emerges from its prison far stronger in body, it is invariably weaker in mind. After centuries of thirsty confinement, all they really want to do is feed. These creatures are easily bound to their jailer's will as a result, and are sent into battle in packs in order to feast on those enemies foolish enough to stray too far from the sanctuary of the main battle line. Vargheists make formidable fighters, for their raw fury and terrible hunger is undiminished by the control exerted by their cruel, vampiric masters. And the last and the most powerful of the vampire count infantry, the Vargulf. The Vargulfs are those powerful yet devolved vampire lords that have since succumbed themselves willingly to their most primal urges, turning their once human bodies into a creature larger and far more powerful in body, but weaker in mind. Within every vampire's soul lurks a slavering monster, driven to feed on the blood of the living time and time again. Most vampires seek control over this side of their existence, clinging to the trappings of aristocracy, privilege, or, in some extreme cases, a debased form of martial honor. Yet not all vampires care for the trappings of mortal life, or seek to control their inner urges. There are a few vampires who allow the animalistic hunter within them to consume their personality completely. These feral predators abandon their citadels in order to run unfettered through the forest, hunting at the head of packs of dire wolves or even stranger beasts. Those who revel in such behavior become physically changed beyond recognition by the vampiric curse, hence are born the creatures known to the peasant folk as Vargulfs. Over the centuries, these most devolved vampires become blood-mad killers that exist only to feed. Like enraged, starved beasts, they run rampant, devouring whole villages and yet never sating their thirst. They slaughter without mercy, luxuriating in bloody carnage, as well as devouring the living. A Vargulf will ransack graves and feast upon the bodies of the dead. Other vampires consider them no better than ghoul kin, though the terrible changes wrought by their surrender to the rage within make them deadly in battle. A Vargulf has a monstrous body, swollen by a constant diet of red meat, unbound by human form. A Vargulf is a contorted mass of packed muscle, giving it the strength to crush a chariot or bowl over entire ranks of those stupid enough to try and pen it in. Powerful legs and broad wing flaps allow Vargulfs to chase down their kills in swift, gliding leaps, and they can lash out at enemies around them with shocking speed. They use their immense claws to strip flesh from bone, the better to suck at the juicy marrow of their prey. A Vargulf's main weapon, however, is a wide mouth filled with dagger-like fangs capable of puncturing armor and crushing skulls. In battle, the Vargulf becomes a whirlwind of rage. Though voracious and unpredictable killers, Vargulfs are far from mindless. They do not possess the aptitude or inclination for sorcery of their vampiric cousins, but their presence still acts as a conduit for dark magic, and they are able to reknit themselves with the raw stuff of necromancy should they suffer injury. Pack animals will instinctively follow Vargulfs, recognizing the apex predator in their midst. Crypt ghouls in particular are drawn to Vargulfs, recognizing something of their own unwholesome nature in the massive beasts. Hence, the caverns of the Strigoi ghoul kings often play host to a Vargulf or two. On occasion, a Vargulf will become a leader of its own pack of crypt ghouls, sharing its lair with a loathsome court of flesh-eaters. From a secret cave or decrepit mausoleum, the Vargulf leads its gruesome attendants in midnight hunts that always end in the slaughter of the living. For their part, the crypt ghouls gain a powerful protector, something the cowardly creatures value highly. Though the hidden armies of ghoul-kin that lurk in the catacombs of the world prefer to skulk and hide than to wage open war, when they boil out of the darkness, a Vargulf's presence can be the difference between victory and defeat.